Welcome to Profitable Women, a podcast for the female business owner who wants to build a profitable and sustainable business that aligns with their life. We will talk about the money stories impacting your decisions, financial strategies to grow your profits, and how to embrace your female superpowers. I'm your host, Sheila Hansen, certified public accountant, business mentor, and certified coach. As a wife, mom of 3, and business owner, I have spent the last 7 years supporting 6-figure business owners make confident financial decisions while raising my babies. After making the hard decision to leave my job at a public accounting firm when I had my oldest, I'm now on a mission to empower women to build wealth without sacrificing themselves. If you find yourself avoiding conversations about money, are burnt out from working all the time, wonder where your cash goes, or want to learn how to pay yourself 6 figures, you're in the right place. Remember, the information in this podcast is general in nature and for educational purposes only. For specific financial advice for your situation, please consult a professional. Now, with that out of the way, let's get to the show. I am so excited. We have our very first guest on Profitable Women, and I cannot wait for this conversation that we are going to have. I want to introduce to you my good friend, Molly Knuth. And Molly is on a mission to help women rewrite how they live and work on their own terms. She knows modern women want to grow families, build businesses or side hustles, impact others for the better, and be a positive force in their communities. And they want to have a fulfilling life along the way. So over the past 7 years, Molly has gone from a stay-at-home mom to a freelance social media marketer to running a social media agency, and now working as a fractional CMO consulting and advising businesses on all things marketing. She and her husband, Ryan, have 4 kiddos whom they raise on their little farm in eastern Iowa, along with cats, chickens, corn, and cows. Welcome to the show, Molly.
Sheila, I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I can't believe I'm the inaugural guest. What an honor.
Right? No pressure. No pressure.
Oh gosh, I'll do my best.
Molly also has a podcast, The Found podcast with Molly Knuth. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
So my podcast started back in 2020, and I think it was a similar trajectory to you. It's just like a feeling that there were so many stories to tell, and hearing these stories can really help other business owners as they grow and go through various seasons of business and life. And so it started as the small-minded podcast for small town, small business owners. But about a couple years in, I decided to rebrand it as the Found podcast and really talk about this process of finding yourself while you're founding a business. And so we dabble in everything like personal and professional development. We do interviews with founders. And this year, I'm really excited because we've been integrating some live coaching calls. So people call in and they ask me a question, and then we coach and record it at the same time and put it out on the podcast for people to learn from. So it's been really fun. The stories that we've been able to share and the impact it's had on listeners has just been one of my favorite things about my business.
Yeah. And I think that also showcases a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is seasons of business and how things have adapted and changed for you over the past couple of years, because you really have gone through a lot of not only personal development to get to where you are today as business owner, but also just different strategies and avenues within your business. So a little history for the guests. Molly and I first met. When did we actually? Was it the Empower Her conference that we met?
In real life?
Yeah.
No, wait. Sheila, I really don't know, because I think we maybe met each other.
Or was that after we did the VIP day?
So I think we met each other through a mutual friend, and then we did the VIP day, and then we saw each other again at that conference. And then we started
working together after that. That's right. So October of 2021, you reached out and we did a VIP day. And I love these days. I've adapted them. And again, because business changes and we learn and we grow, I've adapted what this day is. But at the time, Molly signed up for a whole day with me, and I was just so excited to talk about all things money and dig into the numbers and do some planning. And what was your thought going into that day?
Okay, so in 2021, I had been in business it was fall of 2021. So I had been in business for about 4.5 years at that point. And I had very short-term views at the beginning of my business of like, this was kind of an accident. Like, honestly, I had no big dreams of like being an entrepreneur ever. And it's just this side thing that kind of got going. And so I just kind of was like, oh my gosh, my mentality was, if I want to make more money, then I just need to like make more money, right? Like if I end up bringing in more contracts, then I'll put more money in my pocket. And lo and behold, that was not the case. And so in 2021, I knew I needed to have some better systems in place. And particularly at that time, I had been working with some contractors and people like just on an hourly basis to help me out. But then I had somebody approach me who wanted to join the team as a more formal employee. And I was like, oh, shoot, I don't know how to do this. I don't know if my business is in a place where that makes sense. And also just like in real transparency, I wasn't really paying myself at the time. I was like paying myself here and there. And when the business made money, I would give myself a paycheck. It was nothing regular. And I think if I look back now with like hindsight is 2020, I was starting to feel the beginnings of resentment towards my business that it wasn't paying me. But it looked like, for all intents and purposes, like it looked like a successful business because I did have a lot of clients and I did have really good work to show for those clients. But I was like, how come this isn't like giving me the money that I wanted to? And so that was a point that I reached out to you. I was like, Sheila, I need some help with this.
Yeah. And I remember a lot of that day was talking about, can I afford this employee? What does that mean? What does that look like from now complicating my financial situation with an employee? You know, if that is a different level of paying somebody than just a contractor, what does my business need to be able to sustain that relationship? And how do you determine what you can pay them and if you can afford it? And a lot of that day, I remember, was your idea of where you wanted to go between 21 and 22, which was the idea of an agency and expanding your product offerings or service offerings, if we will. Because at the time you were pretty focused on just social media marketing. Is that right?
Yes. So back in 2017, I was, like I said, it kind of started by accident as I was working with some clients here locally who just needed help with Facebook pages. And so we'd put out content and we would manage their posting schedule and manage comments and inbox messages, things like that. But then we had people get interested in things like Instagram. Then we had people like myself who are interested in podcasting. Alongside content creation is, well, how do you make it look good? And so the person who wanted to come on the team, like she had really great graphic design and web building skills. And so I saw this opportunity to become a one-stop shop for all things small business marketing. And I could see a future where we had a physical location and you came to us and then we could be a house for like graphic design, print materials, all the things. I could see that. So yeah, that was part of the conversation too, because it wasn't just bringing in an employee. It was also bringing in an employee with a different skill set that I thought would allow us to serve more people. And we can talk more about that in a little bit. But yeah, that's where we were coming from at the time.
Yeah. The other part of that day. So we spent some time breaking down, okay, what types of packages and offers and price points and all of that to make the math work on paying this contractor, having the contracts that you have and the client base that you had, what you kind of would need to map that out, if you will. The other part of the day we spent talking about money mindset. And do you remember coming into that, what you felt into that conversation?
I was like, I don't need money mindset. Why are we spending the morning talking about money mindset?
That was exactly your thought. You're like, can we just skip over this part? But what
you knew I was thinking that? Did I say that or did you just like read it on my face?
I think you were just like, yeah, I don't need that part. I just need this part. But we ended up diving into that anyway. And what do you remember any of your discoveries that you had? Because in that exercise, I like to just go through some history questions of like, what did you hear growing up from your parents? And a lot of times from one parent versus another, we'll hear different things about money, or just within the household, we'll have different experiences. And then as you get married or have a partner and then have kids, like all of these other things come in, because now we're not just talking about the household that we grew up in and the stories and experiences we had, but we also have our spouse or significant other and what they're bringing to it. And so do you remember any of the things that came up for you in that exercise?
Well, what I learned is that I actually have a lot of money mindset work that I had to do. And now I know I still continue to need to work on and just be aware of over time. But particularly back in that season, I remember I just had this like deeply ingrained belief that I don't even know if I like verbalized or talked about or anything, but that I was just bad with money. And I was somebody who growing up, like my parents had me super young, and like money was something they worked really, really hard for. And I don't think I really like went without by any means, but it was definitely something that like I knew that, we didn't have a ton of it. And if I wanted it, I was going to have to go get like several jobs. And that was kind of just the narrative of my life growing up. And then to your point about like once you get married, my husband has a whole different philosophy on money. He's like, we can always make more. And like, it was just this, like, I didn't realize that there was a real dichotomy there until like you kind of brought it to attention. And I remember particularly in that money mindset session, we were talking about money is energy. And you're like, I like to vision like money as a river where it just like flows. It comes in and it goes out. And I was like, oh, so for a long time, that was a mantra that I hung on to because I was really having a hard time and wanting to, this is from that time too at the VIP day. You're like, sometimes we like to, and listeners, you can't see this, but like I'm holding my fists really tight and closed. And you're like, a lot of times we try to white knuckle our money, and that doesn't really necessarily keep it in our hand as much as it prevents us from being able to accept anymore because our fists are closed and they're so tight. And what we have to do is release that grip. And in doing that, we do release money out, positive energy out, but it also allows us to open up and accept more of it. And so that was another thing that really stuck out to me from the money mindset part of the VIP day. And again, going into it, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to get out of the money mindset part. I just need to know these like factual things.
These very strategic questions. Can we get to that part?
Absolutely. But the money mindset is the thing that I kept like referring back to, and it stuck with me over time after that VIP day was over.
Yep. And the other part that was so amazing about that day is I had, what was she, 3 at the time? So my baby was there with us, and it was just this really cool experience. And my husband was in the business at the time. I'm sure I'll share that story in the podcast at some point. But so it was him and I and our youngest, and we met at this little small town co-working type space. So it was the 4 of us in the room, and we just got to talk about this. And it was so cool that we got to share that experience because it, again, Molly's goal and one of my goals is to just continue to align our business with our life. So that we got to do that with our kiddo there as a baby, it just represented what both of us are trying to strive for as women who are both mothers.
And I think even that day, I think I had to leave for a little bit and like go pick up the kids from school. And I was like, I'll just be right back. And I had to go like take them home and get them settled. Then I came back and we finished up. But yeah, to your point, it's like making our businesses work in a way that works for us and not just like fitting into a certain mold, because you're in business for yourself. You can make your own rules.
Yes. Okay. So then fast forward, we met October of 21, and then almost a whole year passed. Like we said, we ran into each other or got to go to the same conference, another women's business conference. And I think that was late summer of 22. And then you decided to come on as a full monthly client starting in October of 23. So tell us a little bit what happened between that VIP day and then that next October with your business. And then what led you to saying, okay, I need Sheila in my life more than just one day.
So a lot of the things that we talked about at the VIP day, I did implement. Like we took action on them. So we ended up hiring on that person and she became a part of the team, which was awesome. And I know a couple of your other suggestions that maybe the listeners can benefit from were like, Molly, you need a business Venmo, like not just a friends and family Venmo, like you need a professional one. So I did that. And then we also talked as far as systems, we were like, Molly, QuickBooks self-employed is not the vibe. We need to go full on QuickBooks Online. So started that process in January of 2022 as well. And I was doing a majority of like the bookkeeping and accounting with a family member. And she is a CPA and she knows the ins and outs. So I was like, oh, she'll help me with it. And she had helped me up to that point with all of the things for the business side too. Me, as somebody who is a people pleaser, I just always felt like I didn't want to bother her with things, so I was like, well, just whenever you get to it and like, oh, it's not a big deal. And then I'd try to do some things and then I'd get overwhelmed by QuickBooks because I do not like spreadsheets and QuickBooks just wasn't my area of expertise. And so then we got to a point of 2022 where like we're 6 months, 7 months, 8 months into the year and my QuickBooks is still not where it needs to be. And then on top of that, some of the systems that I had set up for like billing, invoicing, payment receiving back in the early days of the business, by this point, it wasn't working either. I was working on a model of like I would do the work and then I would send the invoice for the work when it was done, even with my retained clients. And so I was billing after the fact and I was letting clients pay like whenever it worked for them. Like, pay via check, pay via cash, pay via credit card, whatever. But what that was running me into, particularly into 2022, now that I had more staffers as we were trying to build to that agency model, was that my cash flow was not working. So I needed a stronger I needed QuickBooks set up because I needed to track everything. And B, I needed to manage my cash flow so that I knew how much was in the bank on specific days instead of saying, well, it's the 15th of the month and only 2 clients have paid, but I need to, run payroll. And I was running into those instances and just like overall, like other things in the business hadn't gone exactly as I had planned either. And so 2022, for a lot of reasons that summer, like I look back and I was like, okay, that was kind of the beginning of a spiral into like, oh my gosh, I need to fix everything. But last thing, and then I'll move into why I decided to work with you. I still was holding on to that mindset of if I want to be able to have more money in the bank, I just need to get more clients or I need to figure out more ways to do cash injections into the business. When really the answer the whole time was cash flow management. I really thought like if I just made a little more, it would make everything better. And so there were some purchases that I made at the time too, that now looking back, I was like, I just thought that was going to be the answer to my problems when it was just a shiny object. So that was in the mix too. So fast forward to August 2022, I had these cash flow issues. I needed to get my QuickBooks set up and I was kind of like, oh man, nothing's going right. And I was like, I think it's time for me to get somebody in here whose job it is to manage the books, to help me get this stuff in line. Not say that I will do it, at some point because I knew I was just going to keep pushing it off. And so I was like, Sheila, will you help me?
Yes. And I said, absolutely, Molly, I would love to have these conversations with you. And it is so common for cash flow to be the thing that trips up small businesses. And really, it is some seemingly simple changes in your systems and processes that made a huge difference from working together. So the really cool thing about the timing of when you came on was that a lot of your contracts were annual contracts. And so within the couple months of us working together, we could really identify, okay, what is not working in the systems? And like you mentioned, one of those is that you were invoicing or billing based on some sort of actual time spent, or you needed the month to happen before you really knew what to bill the client. And so here we have this 30-day cycle, and then we send the invoice, and then we wait for the client to pay because we didn't have, bank account information on hand or anything like that. So we were waiting for them to pay by whatever method they were choosing. And so then you could get to this, 45, 60-day cycle pretty easily before you were paid for the work that you did, the month before. And so one of the conversations we had was for you to take a look at your contracts. And we came up with, okay, based on what you're typically doing for these clients, there really was a somewhat standard that we could go with for each of them. And for 2023, you started implementing these new contracts with them. So we set a fixed fee with maybe a few variables that would then get billed on the next month. But for the most part, they were fixed fee contracts, and you got their ACH or bank information so that you could just pull the payment on the first of the month. I think you technically do like the 5th or something, but you could pull it at the beginning of the month. That way you knew you were paid for the work that you were doing that month. You had the cash in your bank to pay your contractors and your employee for the work that they were doing. And so you didn't have this 45, 60-day float cycle that you were trying to go through. And that made a huge difference for you. And then also, because we had those fixed contracts and we could kind of set that schedule for you, I remember very specifically there was a month towards the beginning that you're like, I just went in and paid all my bills or scheduled all my bills out for the month and I'm done. Like what you were spending time on weekly, maybe even daily at some points to manage all of this money coming in and out at different times through the month. One month you were able to go in and just do the whole activity for the month in a matter of a few days at the beginning of the month. And then you could shift your attention and focus on actually serving your clients or adding to other client experience type things, working with your team, that kind of stuff, rather than all this time collecting from your customers.
And just the stress it alleviated and the time and energy just spent in that cycle of when is this going to get paid? And it wasn't like, I knew my clients were going to pay. I never had an issue with thinking that they were going to ghost me, but it was just a matter of I wonder when this really big check's going to come in. It just took so much of the guesswork out of it and made things so much easier from that regard of the hidden cost of not to put a money pun in there, but I had so much energy and stress wrapped up in this that really that fix of changing my billing processes, oh my gosh, that just made a world of difference.
And I think it's really good to think about it too from the other side of things. In not only did that take time and stress off of you, that took time off of your client as well, because they weren't having to get your invoice, send an email, either whatever their process was for getting it paid, remember to get you a check if they saw, if they normally dropped it off to you or whatever it was. This allowed them, they signed your contract, right? It was something that they knew they were going to do every month. They wanted to continue doing it. It typically doesn't come down to they don't want to pay their bill. They want this service. They want to pay for it, but it's extra steps for them to get you paid. So we can think of it almost as a value add in a way to get these systems and structures in place in our business that also benefit our client, because now they don't have to do anything to get morally paid. They now just have to approve your content or whatever you're sending over, whatever other requests you're sending over to them. It's one less thing from their cash flow management that they have to do as well, because it's going to come out on whatever day you say you pulled funds and in the method that you say you're pulling them from. And so it's really a win-win for both. And I think that's something I see so often with small business owners or female business owners. It's I don't want to bug them, or I don't want to bother them with like following up. And a lot of times it's like, they spaced it. Like they just forgot about it. And we think it can be, we internalize it as, oh, they didn't like my service, or I did something wrong, or it's not the right amount, or like there's more to it. And it's like, no, it's not any of that. They had to go through some steps and they had a long list of other things on their list to do that day. So it can really be a benefit for your customers as well as yourself in having these systems in place, especially when you have reoccurring monthly contracts.
Yeah, the feedback I got from all of my clients was so positive. And for the reasons you said, they were like, oh, this is so much easier. And I'm based in a small town, and a lot of my clients to that point were small town too. And they were like, oh, this is just so easy. I'm like, yeah, I know. It's awesome. And one person in particular who I'd been working with for a number of years, he and his family's business just celebrated 50 years. And I remember sitting across the table from him as I was explaining these changes and how they were going to happen. And I was like, I'm going to move from a services rendered to a services retained model. And he stopped and looked at me. He goes, look at you. You're learning a lot about business. I'm like, I am. And I remember the first run that we did of these auto payments, I was actually on vacation in Florida. And we ran into some snafus like in the first billing cycle, as you do when you try anything new. And I remember I Voxered you really quick. And I was like, hey, Sheila, these 2 payments, I noticed that they didn't process. Can you just help me with that really quick? And you're like, yep. And so it was just like a matter of I needed to check a box that I didn't have checked. But I was like, oh my gosh, billing used to be something that took me and my VA an entire day at the end of the month. And now it was something that was done nearly automatically at that time, but now it is automatically. And it's just like so much less headache. And what I had built up in my mind around these conversations and that people might object that it's auto, it was like, nope, they love it. And now it's just part of my onboarding process for anybody. I'm like, hey, this is just how we do it. And it gives me more confidence now too, to just say, this is what the price is. This is how it's paid. This is when it'll happen. And having that like spelled out really cleanly for the client is something that now for new clients, they really appreciate too, from what I can see now.
Yeah. So that was a big thing that we implemented early on. The other thing that we've really been working on over the last year together is profitability. Because again, like you mentioned, you hadn't been consistently paying yourself. And so we wanted to start digging into how do we adjust things? How do we make the math work? What needs to change so that there is profit and money left over for you to pay yourself consistently? And what does that look like? And so we started looking at the different service offers. And this is where we kind of came to that discovery of we had so many different services. And while there is a situation that model could work, you had a lot of different contractors and maybe not the client load to sustain all of those different people. And so we dug into each client. What were we doing for them? How long did it take? What were the contractors that we were paying to make that happen? And we kind of rated everybody and put them into buckets on like a higher profit, lower profit, what adjustments would need to be made, what shifts could we be making. And that led you to kind of decide to pare down and eliminate some of the things that you had been doing. So kind of tell me from your perspective about those exercises that we did.
Yeah. Well, where we were thinking we were going at the VIP day in 2021. And then in 2022, I was walking some of that out, and we were providing services like web design, and we were providing logo design services and VA services. And again, it was a money mindset thing at the root of it, because I still wanted to keep my prices really fair to clients. And for loyal clients, I didn't want to all of a sudden jack their rates, because when you go from like a freelance solopreneur kind of pricing model and you look at agency pricing models, those are vastly different. And I was like, I still want to keep to the core of what we offer, which is really good service at a reasonable rate. But when you actually walk it out, I'm like, oh, those agencies have those prices in place for a reason, because there's a lot of hidden time in there that I wasn't accounting for. So one of the big things that I found when we were doing a lot of these other services was that my time was really being invested not in like the actual projects. It was a lot in the planning, in the communications, talking to my team and really reviewing things. And I didn't have any of that reflected in the pricing structure and in the billing. And so some of those projects that I was really excited to land and that we did a really kick-ass job on. But in the end, when you and I looked at them, and when I think even more so, like when I was looking at it with this new money mindset lens, instead of just saying like, oh, this is a $1,500 contract, that's $1,500. Now I was looking at it like, that was a $1,500 project. And I think I went in the red on that project by the time I factored in my time. And so early 2023, when I started working with you in that fall of 2022, by early 2023, we knew, and I knew, I was like, I don't think we can do these web design projects anymore because they take too much of my time. And I'm not willing to continue offering that. So we went away with some of those services. And then throughout the year, as we were looking at various client workloads and things like that, I am not great about like capacity. That's something you and I have talked about a lot, where I'm like, oh yeah, I know I can just fit that in, and not necessarily saying I am capped at 6 retained clients or something like that. And so especially now, late 2023, early 2024, I am like even further along that process of saying, okay, now I know that I need to have X number of clients at this service at that rate. I'll have room for this number of clients at this rate. And then from there, I am booked. And I'm not there yet, but now at least I see that. And so I'm making those plans for 2024. And I think some of the big things that I can take away from working with you now over the past 14, 15 months is that like, I was like, oh, if I get Sheila in here and she's on my books, we're going to have all my money problems solved in like 3 months. No problem. And I've learned that like anything else, it's going to take a little more time, but because we've been working on this consistently, we're having these conversations like in our quarterly meetings, in our Voxer chats, in our monthly money mindset calls. It's really helped me see things differently, and I'm standing more confidently, and I'm like repping it out time and time again. And it's not an overnight change, but it's giving me that money muscle that is building slowly, but giving a better foundation.
Yeah. And I remember when we were onboarding you into like the monthly bookkeeping process, one of the things that we ask for is view only access to either the bank or the credit card if possible. Otherwise, you send monthly statements that we can reconcile to. And I had asked to get added to your credit card, and you carried a level of fear around us seeing that information in the beginning. That was a big hurdle that we got over together, of you and us building up your trust in those first couple of months. I think the first couple of months you did just send us statements or give us the balance. And then you eventually got to a point where like, okay, I feel comfortable adding you now. But that was a big thing for you to overcome. And that was through those regular conversations that we were having about your money. And I remember very specifically going back to that whole I'm bad with money concept or idea that we had brought up, those first couple calls. That was a constant theme that was always coming up. And then now where you're at, like, it is so cool to get to be on the other side and witness somebody's transformation in their mindset. But you don't have those phrases that float out in the conversations anymore. It is a completely different Molly from where you are making financial decisions now than when you were just coming on or when we had that VIP day. The things that you can understand from, okay, what does this project really mean? Not only from the financial side of things, but my energy and my capacity and my time. What does that mean? Is it fulfilling me in the ways that I want to be fulfilled? Or like you said, am I spending all my time just managing my team? That's not what I want to be doing. Like, that might work for an agency model and for some business owners, But for you specifically, you found that that wasn't your sweet spot and what you wanted to be spending your time with. So it's so cool now to just be able to see the difference in Molly from a couple years ago, and even more specifically, October of 22 Molly to now, and the types of conversations that we get to have. And I think it was on our last call. Again, you were working on these new contracts for the upcoming year, and you're now proposing on some things that are a new offering for you that you hadn't even been doing in the past. And you had Voxered me and you're like, you know what? I just put this number down and I said, that's what I charge. That's my minimum. And like, there was no feeling about it. It was just like, that's what it is. And I would have never thrown out that number on a proposal like that long ago. So it's just so cool to get to see, like, by having these regular conversations, the little bit of growth that happens each month, each quarter to get to where you are. Again, like you said, it's not a 3-month thing. We can do that VIP day and get you some really good like foundations and things to go off of. But it is that consistent conversation and consistently looking at your numbers, consistently analyzing what's working and what's not, and continuing to make these tweaks in your business that will continue to move you down the path to become more profitable and sustainable long term.
Yeah. I don't want anybody listening to think that I have it all together and all figured out, because there's still things I'm working on for sure. But I think particular to, and that's something that I think I learned too, like Molly of 2021 and before. And again, there's all this money mindset stuff that I'm still working through. But my natural default is if something is frustrating me or something is hard for me or something isn't going as I planned, is to avoid it. And then I'm like, it'll figure itself out. And so something that I learned was like, I need to be actively involved in these conversations, and I need somebody to be holding me accountable to making sure I'm not avoiding it. And then it becomes a bigger issue. And so back in 2022, when we were onboarding, to your point, I had so much discomfort with looking at these things. Like even sometimes opening the bank app was hard for me and I would just not do it. And like, it's just a simple thing. If you think about it, it's like, I'm just tapping an app. Like I would open Instagram, but for me, it held so much emotion and weight and shame and like all of those things, because in my head, I'm telling myself, I'm not good with money. I am the messiest client Sheila's ever dealt with. I am like, all of these negative things. And I remember showing up for our first quarterly call in January 2023. And I remember the hat. I remember the sweatshirt I was wearing. I remember seeing myself in the Zoom window and I was sitting with like my shoulders slumped. My eyes were huge. I was pale because I was so nervous to have that conversation about money. And you and I had been friends for a long time by at that point, and we'd worked together on the VIP day, but I still had so much baggage that I was carrying. And again, I'm not saying today that I'm like totally beyond that, but because I was working on, or I have been working on things consistently, and we are digging into the numbers, even if they are uncomfortable, I now know that I'm able to make better decisions and I'm able to make sense of those numbers. And I've been listening to financial podcasts and reading articles about money and like feeling empowered about money in certain areas. And I'm like, whoa, who's this person? But it's changed the way I carry myself. I think it's changed not just the way I show up to our calls, but also the way I show up in my business. And like you said, this year, it's really shifted my perspective of like, what is the value that I bring to the table? Whereas before I'd say, oh, shoot, I can't raise it this much. Or like, I really am not working that many hours because it's something that's so easy for me. And now I'm like, this is what I should charge. This is what it should be. And I know like a big thing that I was thinking about recently was like, if I want to raise, it's not like I'm working at a corporation where they're going to give me an annual raise on a certain date. If I want to raise, I can't sit around waiting for someone else to do it. I have to do it for myself. And so I have to be willing to say, this is my price. This is my price going forward. And it's hard, but it gets easier every time you do it until it's just second nature. At which point I'll probably be like, oh, now I'm raising the bar again. Like, as we do. But definitely the confidence, I think, and the level of discomfort has shifted in big ways in the last 15 months of working with you.
Yeah, I think there is so much benefit to leaning into that discomfort, no matter what it is, because so one of the things that I've done during this time that I've worked with Molly is I got certified as a life coach to bring in more value to these conversations that I'm having with clients. And one of the concepts from there is that there's this 50-50, right? Like 50% positive, 50% negative. And so if we want to grow, think of it as a circle. If we want our circle to become bigger and be able to experience more positive, then at the same time, that 50% negative side of the circle has to grow as well. And so when we lean into that discomfort on the, like, I know this is scary. I know this is going to bring up some things for me, but I'm willing to dig into that and uncover that and have these conversations. It allows that circle to grow. And I think your transformation over this last year is really evidence of that, leaning into the discomfort so that you can come out with a bigger circle overall.
And another thing that came in through your life coaching certification too, and it's something that I draw from a lot, like we'd be on calls and you'd be like, Molly, that's just a thought. And I'd be like, oh, shoot. Before that, I was like, okay, I have this thought. And then I'd start to like embody it. And then I'd start to like repeat that thought. And then it turned into this whole big like monster that weighed on my shoulders. And then after working with you and now like reading about it, and I notice it in different books.
Do you want to share with the audience one of the biggest thoughts that you just wore the hat like it was part of you?
I don't know. What one are you thinking of?
That I'm a people pleaser.
Oh.
That it was like, you're wearing a red shirt or you're wearing a white, like you had that thought and you carried it around so much like it was just part of you, that it was fact, that you couldn't do anything about it. And so we've done a lot of work on that one together in our calls on why do we think that? What is that? When we think that, what does that bring up as far as a feeling and the actions and the results that we get from thinking that? And that has been a big transformation too. You've had some recent conversations that you knew were going to be so hard, and I don't want to say you hesitated this time, but you didn't want to have them, but you knew it was what was best, probably for everyone, but very specifically knew it was what was best for you. And you leaned in and you had those conversations anyway. And so it was really identifying that there was a thought along the way that I can't push back or I can't make somebody else uncomfortable because that's not who I am. And so we found this neutral ground of I can still feel for them in whatever reaction and response they might have to the situation, but I can also do what's best for me and my business and the situation that I'm in too. And so we've done a lot of that, had a lot of those kinds of conversations throughout the year as well. And it's like so empowering that we get to build these businesses that really do align with us and bring out the best in us, and that we can shape them to be whatever. But then it is also so hard that it falls on us to have these conversations or push through this hard stuff. We can't push it to somebody else, to do for us. So when we know, it's like, well, I am the one setting the price. Now I have to go to my customer and tell them that this is their price. In other situations, you could just say, well, this is what so-and-so said the price is going to be. But now it's you. It's all on you to do those kinds of things.
And I think something that helped me with that process too was I was working this fall, and I'm in an ongoing program with Whitney Sullivan, and she does a lot of training around Enneagram and leadership. And so this fall, when I was talking to her and kind of going through some major like thought shifts, was this concept of like in hard conversations, we can frame it as this is going to be hard and this is going to be uncomfortable. We can also, like to your point, we can change that thought and we can say, I'm a leader when, and then fill in the blank. And so that's how I've been reframing a lot of things too, is like, oh, shoot, I'm going to go in and have this really hard conversation with a contractor. I'm going to have this really hard conversation with a client. But I can now look at it and say, I'm a leader when I make decisions that are in the best interest of my business. I'm a leader when I need somebody to do something differently and I treat them with compassion while giving them feedback. And so it's reframing it that way too and saying like, sometimes these decisions that we are making as we are digging into the finances aren't comfortable. They're very uncomfortable. We have to have consequences to some of those decisions that we made in the past that are just showing up now. And they aren't always pleasant, but it's part of the process. And like any big business out there now, they are not the business, or even if it's just like a brand persona or personality, they're not the same person who they were when they started. Madonna has gone through different seasons of her branding. Taylor Swift obviously has her eras. Nike is not just a shoe company like they were. Every brand and business has gone through different changes and pivots for successfully or unsuccessfully. We just remember the successes more than the failures. But when you're the business owner on the other side, I think you think of the failures more than the successes. But no matter what, when you dig into this specific part of the business and you can then see where things are working, where they are not, and then therefore there's decisions that have to be made because of that, you can say, I'm a leader when I make this hard choice, but it's going to pay off in the end. And so having that mindset about it is something that's served me really well in the last few months too.
Yeah. I think that's one of my favorite things about when we do quarterly calls with clients that are on that package is that we'll put together dashboards and graphs and charts. And so we get to show them visually from a financial perspective, the progress that we've made. And one of the big things for Molly was, again, that whole concept of more revenue does not mean more success or more cash in the bank. And so the charts and graphs that we really got to see this year was revenue stabilizing or even dropping in some cases, but your overall profit, and because your costs were dropping, your overall profit was then going up. And so we got to see those wins with each of the changes and, quarter over quarter as you made adjustments, and we could really visualize and see like, okay, if we would have just been focused on revenue going up, that wouldn't mean that there's more cash in the bank. But now that even with revenue dropping and profit going up, that gives us that visual reminder that we are on the right path for the specific goals that you had in mind. Getting out of spending so much of your time managing your team and getting back to the work that you really loved, which was marketing strategy. I mean, I am just in awe. Molly will do these on Instagram stories sometimes, and I think it's what your coaching calls on your podcasts are, but you'll just say like, throw me an industry or throw me a business and I'll throw you out like some ideas on how you would market or content that you would put out. And I just think it's so funny that in stories, she can go from, like a accounting firm to a gas station to like all these different industries or topics. So you can just come up with these ideas of how to market them differently that's unique. So I think that's just a good summary of everything that we've done over the last year is really that when we shift our focus on different key metrics that matter more or align with the specific goal we have, we can really shift and make some big progress in our business. So as we wrap up today, the one question that I'm going to ask every guest is, this podcast is really about empowering women and female business owners. And so is there something that you have specifically learned about money or a tip that you have you've been giving them all along, but a specific tip that you have for female business owners when it comes to their finances?
I think the big thing would be to embrace change. And I think this can be applied to a variety of components of the business or in your life. But I think that for me and for a lot of people I know, we can get really in our heads about making any kind of change. Like it might be pursuing that business or that side hustle. And you used to think you had to utilize your college degree, but you have this lifelong desire to do something totally different. And it could be a change like I changed my billing processes. And it seems and to us at the time to be this huge, huge thing. And it's going to be so hard and people are going to think some way of me. But ultimately, we have to make the changes that are in our own best interest. And if we don't, nobody else is going to. So I think embracing change and knowing that everybody's considering change at some point, and, now is as good of time as any. So I think looking at the numbers and then embracing doing things differently is my biggest recommendation.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, just embracing, not that they're failures. I don't think there's ever failures, but there's things to learn from. And so in that change, it's like embracing that, oh, maybe that's how we did it in the past, but that's not getting me closer to my goal. And so let's make a shift, right? Let's kind of accept that we learned from this and now we're going to do something different going forward. I know you've gone through various phases of your business and made shifts and changes, and we can learn from each time that we're at a point of decision making. There's something to be learned. And so I think just letting go of that guilt or shame that we might have about, oh, how did I get here? Or we don't have to keep going down that same path just because we thought that that was what we wanted. And maybe at the time it worked out and something happened and now our business is shifting in a different direction. So I think that quick to change and adapt that. And so much of that is the mindset that comes along and doing that mindset work, right? Because we can get set in our ways so easily. So Molly, I am so thankful that you shared your story and told us all of the things that has happened in your business over the last couple of years. I am so grateful for you, not only as a client, but as now a good friend. And we will be sure to post all of the ways that you can get in touch with Molly in the show notes. But your favorite social media is?
I'm most active over on Instagram at MollyKnuth_MKM. I'm making it a point to be more active on LinkedIn this year. So if you are somebody on LinkedIn, you can go hold me accountable over on that platform too and be like, Molly, I heard you're going to be here. I'm putting my stake in the ground. I'm going to be on LinkedIn this year.
And how often do you have new episodes on your podcast?
We have 3 episodes a month, so it's not your typical standard format, but there's one that introduces a theme, one is a guest who really embodies that theme, and then the third is a coaching call, and that'll be the format for the rest of 2024.
Oh, that's so exciting. So thank you again, Molly, for sharing part of your day with me, and I can't wait for what comes in the rest of 2024 for you.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Profitable Women. Make sure you never miss an episode by hitting the follow button in your favorite podcast player. And things are always easier when you talk about them with a friend, so be sure to share this episode with them. If you're looking for more ways to grow your financial confidence, head to the show notes for a link to subscribe to our weekly email. Until next time.